All right, well, welcome back. It has taken me a good deal longer to record this than I really needed to, but it's fine. Here we are. Today, as I said before, we are going to be talking about, and I should have the book, hold on. As promised, talking about The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I'm very excited to talk about this one, so let's go ahead and just get right on into it. As usual, I'll go ahead and give you a brief summary of the book, then I'll tell you about my spoiler-free thoughts, give you my overall rating, give you a warning, go into my spoiler-filled thoughts, and then we'll wrap up at the end. So usually I try to not memorize, but like remember what I said in my summary overall, but I'm not gonna even attempt to do that today because my brain can't do it. So I'm just gonna read you the summary that I wrote. So, published in 2019 and written by best-selling author Samantha Shannon, The Priory of the Orange Tree is an epic fantasy following various heroes, or rather, heroines, from across the world. Following figures from the west, east, and south of this fictional landscape, the story follows the impending threat of the Nameless One, whose minions are stirring and threatening to bring about a second grief of ages, something these characters never thought they'd have to suffer in their own lifetime. Written in the chivalric style of older fantasies, The Priory of the Orange Tree is a sweeping tale filled with myths, dragons, and magic, led predominantly by the heroines at the helm. So, let's go ahead and go into my spoiler-free thoughts. As usual, I'll go ahead and go through each of the categories that I try to rate these books on. So that's character, plot, writing style, setting and immersion, pacing, and then I kind of consider my subjective feelings towards the book over the objective-ish look that I'm trying to give with all these other categories. So beginning with character. I'm only going to give character a half star here. And I don't want people to think that this means the characters are bad, because they're not. My thing with this is that I liked the characters, but I didn't love them. So our main characters we've got, and I'm going to butcher these names. I'm not going to lie to you because I didn't listen to this on audiobook. I just read the whole thing in print, and so, you know, it's fantasy, the names are complex, and I probably don't actually know how they're pronounced, but that's okay. So we've got Sabrin, I always pronounce it Sabrin in my brain. Sabrin Berethnet, the Queen of Innis in the west. Iad Durian, a lady-in-waiting originally from the south and secretly a mage who was sent to protect the queen. Tane, I think is how you say it, a dragon rider training in the east, and I think it's Nicle Roos, a disgraced alchemist from the Free State of Mentendon who was exiled from the Queendom of Innis. It's not that they're bad characters, but again, with the higher fantasy style, I just really struggled to personally connect to them, and that was the one of the few things that I had complaints with in this book. It was a great book, and I think it's getting a pretty high rating overall, but this aspect in particular I kind of struggled with because I liked them, but I didn't feel invested, really, in any of them personally. And again, this is not to say that they're not three-dimensional, multifaceted, well-written characters. They are. Just with my personal tastes and the things that I relate to, it was something where I felt a little distanced from them, both through the style of the story itself and just from who they were as people. There was no one character that I really felt relatable, at least to myself. It's not a failing of the book or the writer, just something that I kind of struggled with personally. I felt similarly in this book as I did to when I read A Song of Ice and Fire several years ago, where I liked the characters, I was rooting for them, I sympathized for them, but I didn't necessarily have any favorites or feel particularly attached. Besides Arya. Arya's my girl, and that remains true to this day. But in this one, yeah, I liked them all, they were fine, but they weren't my crew, you know? I don't know. Also, similar to Game of Thrones, this cast was so big. I get it's an epic fantasy, and that's just, like, it comes with the territory, you know? I really struggled for that first 200 pages or so to really understand who was who and why they were there. There is a handy list of players at the back of the book, at least in my copy, so if you do get confused, you can go flip back to that and kind of scan through and figure out who is supposed to be who, and where and what. But it's not a list that I really referenced. I was trying to get to know these characters on the page, and it took me a while to find that there was a list of players at the back. But yeah, for the first couple hundred pages, I felt really bogged down by how massive this cast was, and there was just constantly people being introduced. Then I would feel like, oh gosh, who is this now? And who are you supposed to be, and why do I pay attention to you? So it was just a little overwhelming at the beginning, for sure. And I would argue, truthfully, that a large number of them felt pretty unnecessary to the plot, but I think that's just me. Or maybe I'm just not, you know, wise enough, smart enough to recognize what they are doing in the grand scheme of things, and I kind of just saw the surface level of what was going on there. And again, I don't know if I really had a favorite. Usually I have at least one character where even if I think the rest of the cast is like, ah, they're okay and I like them, I have one that I do grow pretty attached to. For example, I talked about this was kind of my feeling in the Poppy War in the first book, but I loved Katai and he was my favorite. Had so much fun getting to follow his character. And the others I liked, but I didn't necessarily love any of them. But here it was kind of like, yeah, I kind of like you all. Not one of you stands out to me as being like the best, at least in my opinion. So I don't know, it was weird. So yeah, half star for character. Again, I was rooting for them. I really liked them. It is a good cast. They're well-written characters. I don't want this to be taken as like a boo, bad characters. They're poorly written, because that's not the case at all. Just something that I didn't necessarily personally connect to in that way, though I did enjoy following their stories and I do think they were well written. Okay, for plot, I'm gonna go ahead and give this a 3/4 star. Again, I know my rating system is so wonky and weird right now. I can't help it, sorry. Maybe I could, but I'm not going to. It works for me. So I really liked the plot. I love a good ancient evil rising from their sleep and threatening the existing peace. It's fun. I love those epic fantasies that deal with something kind of cosmic and massive beyond understanding. So I loved the plot. I thought it was great. It does take a little bit to establish what the plot is. Again, for the first 200 pages or so, kind of similar to how I was dealing with characters. I was kind of like, okay, this is fine, but what is the point? But once we get to the point of the story, once we kind of take off, it does completely take off, and I didn't want to stop reading after that. My only complaint, and the only reason it's not really getting a full star, is that some of the plot points I felt were resolved a little too easily. Might just be my opinion, but there were several plot moments and plot points where it had the right amount of gravitas, and then others where I would go, oh, that's it? We're done? It's solved? Okay, I guess. Moving on. So yeah, again, that might just be my opinion and kind of just how I felt as a reader, but at the same time, yeah, those moments kind of bothered me a little bit, enough for me to not give it a full star. But besides that small handful, and really considering the fact that this is an 800+ page book, it really is small in the grand scheme of things, the plot works so well for the story that's being told. The author does a lot of work with history versus myth and how they get kind of entangled with each other and misconstrued, and how different areas of the world interpret this part of the history, this part of myth, and how it's just how it all ties together in the end. It's really neat, and it makes for a really great external story going on. Okay, moving on to writing style. This is getting a full star, no question. Samantha Shannon's writing style is just so beautiful. I was stunned endlessly by how just gorgeous the prose was. I had a couple of small complaints here and there. One of them was that some of her sentences or paragraphs I would have to read over a couple times because they would confuse me. There's one I can think of in particular where, without spoiling it, one character comes to another character and this character's love is lying like prone and injured, and this character says something like, it wasn't a mortal wound, like they're gonna be okay. And then this character who just came into the scene went, he's dead. And this character's referring to something else that happened, but it takes a second for you to establish that that's what this character is talking about, because we've got person lying injured and looking near death over here. And so like, yeah, this character is okay, but for a second you go, whoa, wait, what? No? I thought they were fine. So things like that would happen every now and then where I'd go, I feel like we could have been a little clearer about that. And so that was something, just if I'm gonna nitpick, which I am, sorry, yeah, that would get a little confusing here and there. And then secondly, there were some character moments, and this maybe ties a little bit more into character than writing style, but I think it is a writing style choice, which is why I put it here. There were some character moments that felt a little unsatisfactory, where there were certain like parts of their arc where it was supposed to be like, oh, here's this grand revelation or epiphany, and it didn't feel earned to me, and to me that was a writing choice. So little things like that where I was like, I'm not sure about that, but the rest of it was so good I can't even dock it points. I think it still deserves a full star. There are so many times I think that like epic, chivalric, old fantasy tone can be a bit much or come off as too much or make you feel really distant from what's going on, but the way she balances it with the story, it just works so well. There's so much of this that is so tangible and just beautiful. There were several lines I had to stop and just go, oh, that's so pretty. It's really lovely. And it makes me want to read her other books. I know she's written another series before this, and I think there's a prequel to this book now, and maybe there's a second one coming. I feel like I heard rumor of that at one point. I don't know for sure. Yeah, it makes me want to read her other stuff because I was just so impressed by the specific voice that she has. One example I can remember, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but she says something like, dawn cracked like a robin's egg over the horizon, and the way I could just picture that and like that exact shade of blue and the way it was dawning, like she does these little things in her writing where she manages such gorgeous imagery in so few words, and I thought it was just so impressive and lovely. And she's really good about pulling you in with the five senses. Even the times where I struggled to establish what was going on, especially in that first couple hundred pages or so, even in those moments I still felt completely immersed in the story because all of her descriptions make everything feel so real and tangible, like you're there in the world with those characters. And so I couldn't even complain that I was lost about the story because I was like, you know, I'll figure it out as time goes on, but wow, look at what's happening here, and look at how this world looks, and look at all these things that you can feel and touch and smell and see just from the way she's describing it. So writing style, full star. And then moving right on to setting and immersion, because that kind of ties nicely into this. Setting and immersion also gets a full star. This was incredible. The world building and just the world itself was one of the most fun parts of the book to me. I will say, if you are not typically a reader of high fantasy, this book is so dense. It does not hold your hand. It does not guide you along nicely. It kind of chucks you into it and says, okay, if you can't swim, then drown. Or keep up, I don't know. Yeah, I've got a fair bit of higher fantasy under my belt at this point, and even I struggled, for, like I said, for this first couple hundred pages to really establish who was who and what was happening. So yeah, if this isn't typically your genre, maybe wait until you read some other epic fantasy, because yeah, just the world building and everything going on, there's so much of it happening, and it is really dense, and there is a pretty steep learning curve there. But if you can handle it, the world is incredible. Like I said before, she does so much work with the five senses on a line-by-line basis that you can pretty much tell where you're supposed to be in the grand scheme of the world at any given point, because everything feels so distinct. Even without the chapter headings and like the knowledge of which character you're following, I feel like you'd be able to place yourself in the world pretty easily because of the way that she sets the scene. She does so much work showcasing the world's religions, mythologies, histories, and how they vary from region to region, and it really all just bleeds back into the plot and the story, and I think is what makes the plot and story work so well. But from a setting and immersion standpoint, you just feel like you're reading an account of actual history because it's so clear. And there's so much work going on there where it just feels completely realized. It's also just fun. There's dragons, there's magic, there's court drama, there's like royal court drama, there's, you know, piracy and seafaring and other magical creatures and stories of witches living in those creepy woods in the north, and it was just, it was so like epic and realized, but also just being a ton of fun. So yeah, setting and immersion, I was so immersed in this world. I loved it. Okay, and then moving on to my final category for pacing. This is gonna get a 3/4 star from me as well. It was almost perfect, but not quite, at least for me. Again, the beginning is much slower, but that works for this story in particular. Again, I don't typically tend to be somebody who is annoyed by slower paced stories. I tend to like slower paced stories, things that build. You do need to spend a good chunk of time at the beginning there to kind of understand the respective characters and their respective conflicts and why it all matters and what we're going towards. So the build up works really well, and it builds at a really good pace. It becomes more and more epic as it goes on. The plot points that are there are introduced and wrapped up at a good speed and at the correct moments for the most part. The only thing here, and the only reason I'm not giving it a full star, is that the ending felt really rushed to me. I know the book is already 800 pages, but I feel like it needed just a little bit more. Not a ton, but like maybe a few chapters. There were certain plot lines where the ends were left kind of loose, and I didn't mind it. It seemed to suit those characters in that storyline, and there were other plot lines that the way they were wrapped up or didn't wrap up, I kind of just felt like, oh, that's all? I wanted a little bit more from that. And maybe that's just a personal preference thing, but also because, you know, I spent 800 pages with these characters and in this world for some of those things to just wrap up so quickly. It just felt like, you know, I'm in it, and then suddenly I'm not. In my copy too, let me check this before I say anything. I think it's like page 715. We get to the last part because it is divided into parts. I just read it, so I feel like that number's pretty accurate, but let me check. Exactly 715. There's the end. There's the last part there, part 6. And it ends on page 804. And so the amount that we've spent in the other parts, Like, this just feels really short for an ending for something that big, you know? And again, like, if she drew it out too much, then it wouldn't work. But again, I'm saying I think just a little bit more time with some of those plot points at the end would have helped me, at least as a reader, feel like it was more wrapped up well. So now just looking at my personal preference for the story, if I tally up the actual stars I gave it, it's only getting 4 stars, but I liked this more than a 4-star read. I'm gonna say it's sitting at a 4.25. 4.25 stars. Because it's absolutely better than a 4-star read, but I don't think it quite matched the 4.5 to 5-star reads in the past for me. So it's sitting like right in between there where it's really good, but not quite up here for me. I didn't end up making a video about this last month, but the Dreamblood duology by N.K. Jemisin that I just read, I think I felt very similarly to those books as I did to this one, where I thought it was so impressive and lovely and I really enjoyed the story and I'm so glad to have read it. But it's one where I'm not leaving so much of my heart behind with it that I feel like it gets a higher score than this. But again, my 4-star reads are the reads that typically that I really like, but it's not like a new favorite. I think it's good. I had a good time, but not something that I'm gonna be like raving to the heavens about forever. Because like my 4.5 to 5-star reads are the ones that I'm thinking about for days, weeks, months, years afterwards. I leave a piece of myself behind with them, and 4-star reads are not like that. But this is in that weird space, kind of like with the Dreamblood duology that I read last month, where it's better than 4 stars for sure, but I don't think it's quite up here. So 4.25 is where I'm putting it. I wasn't really sure what to expect going into this book. I knew that it was a doozy going into it because one, it's massive, it's huge. But also, I didn't really know a ton about it, just that it is high fantasy and that people really liked it and it was a bestseller for a long time and people have been talking about it for a while. So it's one that I had on my shelves and one that I wanted to read for a long time. I think more than anything I felt intimidated going into it, and not even necessarily by the size. Like, I read pretty long books pretty often. I didn't know going into it that it would be so dense, and as soon as I began, I was like, oh gosh, I have to read this before the end of the month with all these other things that I'm trying to read before the end of the month. So I was a little nervous that it was going to take me a really long time and that I was going to really struggle to get through it. But once I hit that, again, like 200-page mark or so, I flew through this. It took me maybe a week to read it, and that's maybe just my own like proclivity for reading quickly, but at the same time, once the story picks up, I just wanted to get back to it. I looked forward to reading it every day. I was excited when I got to sit down for big chunks of time and get through a good chunk of it. So I did really enjoy the story and I had a lot of fun with it. And I'm a sucker for stories that, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but like that have all these stories that you know are going to eventually converge in some way, whether physically or emotionally. Like, you don't know how they're going to meet, but in some way they're going to clash. And I think that's set up in the text anyway, so I don't think that counts as a spoiler. But I love stories that do that, where we're following various characters from various parts of the world and you just know at some point it's all gonna collide. And this was one of those, so I personally had a lot of fun with it. I would also say this is definitely for an older audience. It's dense and intellectual and there is some suggestive material, but even that isn't super intense in my opinion. It's just a lot, and I think, yeah, again, clearly intended for an adult audience. So if you are a lover of epic fantasy filled with, you know, magic and mythology and fantastical creatures and fantastical landscapes, and you can handle some dense world building, then I absolutely recommend this. I think it is a super fun read. I don't want to say fun in the sense that like it's lighthearted, because that is not the case at all, but that's the best way I can describe the experience of reading this book for me. Was I had fun reading it because I thought so many pieces of it were so cool and I loved what she was doing. So yeah, again, I don't know if I'm going to be singing this one's praises to the heavens forever, but I think it's well worth your time and I really enjoyed it a lot. Gonna go ahead and get into my spoiler-filled thoughts, so if you don't want those, you can go ahead and go away. You do want to stick around, I'm gonna go ahead and begin those now. I don't actually have many spoiler-filled thoughts this time. I say that every time and then I talk for like 20 minutes. It's a bit of a bummer, but I think I want to share my disappointments first and then talk about the things that I loved. So, thinking mostly about everything at the end, I wanted more from the Dunmata Morosa at the end. I felt like her storyline got wrapped up so fast and I was disappointed. I wanted to see her and Loth reunited because I thought that pairing was so interesting and I wanted to see them be able to like see each other safe again, and I wanted to see what became of that. So him just kind of getting that letter from her and it like suggesting that she's okay, I wasn't super thrilled with that. It's fine, it works, but I was like, oh, I thought we were gonna like see her. We had all this buildup of like Loth thinking about her being trapped in the city, and there was like so much buildup to the taking of, I think it's Korskoro is the city. Like, the whole battle that goes there happens off page, and so like her storyline felt like it could have been so significant, and we kind of just like brush it to the side. And I understand that there's only so much space you have, but I wanted a little bit more from that. That was a bit of a bummer for me. Also, I would have loved to see Margaret's wedding. I think that would have been a sweet thing to end on. I understand why she didn't do it, but like, yeah, we talked so much about her getting married and how much we kept pushing off the wedding so other characters could be there, and I was like, they're all here, they're safe, get married, and I wanted to see it. And we didn't. I am happy that we more or less get a happy ending from everyone. With Iad and Sabran, you know, I appreciate that even though they know they have to go their separate ways, there's a peace in that. I feel like a lot of times in life and in literature you get that sense of like, well, will they wait? And oh gosh, there's like such a separation, but that sense of faith that they have in one another, that yes, we still get the fulfillment of their individual arcs, that they set out to do what they were supposed to do, and they're going to continue to fulfill the role they were supposed to fulfill, but they know they love each other enough to return to one another at the correct time. I liked that. I thought that was sweet, and I appreciate that it acknowledges the realistic circumstances that they're in, of the things that they are responsible for, that they must take care of, while also acknowledging their bond and knowing that they're going to come back together at some point. I appreciated that. That could have been handled poorly, and it wasn't. And I mentioned before moments where I went, oh, like that's it? Especially with character development, and the one I keep thinking of is when, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Nikolai, I'm just gonna call him that, where he decides not to betray Sabran. I felt like that was not in character at all. And I understand why it happened, and I understand he was softening over time, but he hated her. He hated her. And the idea that, like, I don't know, it just didn't feel satisfactory to me. Like, I thought it would have been better dramaticism if there was more of a fight there, or something revealed where he, like, had to make this choice against his will, and it was another moment of character self-realization for him. But that just felt a little bit too, like he had the knife and he was ready to hurt her, and was like, actually, no, because she twisted, like, it was perverted of her to take Jannert's form, and also Leia wouldn't want me to do this. And, like, I don't know. I just didn't really buy it, but maybe it's just me. And with Leia, I'm going to talk a little bit about Leia, but like, there were just some characters where I didn't really understand why they were there. One example was Kit. Like, I really liked Kit. I liked Kit a lot as a character. I thought he was fun. I was devastated by his death. I thought it was so sad. But also, for a lot of the story, I was kind of like, but why was he there? What was his purpose in the story? And I feel like because the cast was so big, there were certain characters where I kind of just didn't understand what their purpose was. With Kit, I think maybe, you know, you've got that, a lot of that has to do with Lot's arc as a character, and that's fine. But because he was, you know, knocked off the pages so quickly, I kind of just felt a little like, oh, okay. So just things like that where I was a little bit bummed, or it felt like that wasn't wrapped up as well, or I wish we had had a little bit more explanation. Maybe, again, it's just beyond my own comprehension, and I'm kind of missing the deeper meaning there, but I don't know, that's how I felt. Insert that meme of Daniel Jackson from Stargate. It's just how I feel about it.
Anyway, I'm sorry, but that just happens to be how I feel about it. What do you think?
But anyway, beyond those little irritations, oh, this was so fun, and I really enjoyed it, and I don't think I was expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. I didn't really know what to expect going into it, but yeah, the amount of times throughout the week that I was reading it that I was like, oh, well, that's exciting, I get to go home and read, or I have a couple hours to sit down and read, or my poor husband would be like, let's hang out. I'd be like, but my book. I wanted to get back to it. I really enjoyed it. And just, okay, things that I love. The final battle was so cool. I imagined seeing that on like an IMAX screen, and I got chills. Like, just the way that would feel in surround sound with the big old, it was cinematic in nature, and I loved that. And I loved that it came down to Iad and Tane, and how it's the fire magic and the star magic, and it's the centuries-old riddle that no one could solve, and it required them to put aside these things that they've known forever and to trust each other. It was such a neat theme, and to see that all come to this epic conclusion, you know, with dragons and the end of the world, it was really neat. And I really cannot get over the way that she weaved mythology, religion, history, lore, like all of these together into the plot, into the world building, because that's something I'm trying to do in my own book, and it's really hard. It takes so much work, like, in the background, the things that you have to do before you can even begin writing the story. I'm so impressed by what she accomplished with that, and the way that it was something all of these characters had to come to terms with, that these things they've always believed weren't necessarily true, or all of them having to come to terms with the fact that the foundations of their faith were a little shaky, and sticking to their faith but having to adjust or trust that they would still be able to keep that faith even as they learn these new things, or just learn how to navigate that. As a reader and as a writer, I really appreciated the way that she brought that theme to the helm and the way it kept playing out in each character in different ways. It was really cool. I feel bad giving just a half star for character because the characters were really well done, and I don't want anyone to think that they weren't. They just weren't my personal favorite. There weren't any where I was like, oh, I love them. I liked them, but my heart hurt for them a lot. I really felt for them, but I wasn't, you know, super attached. That was the only thing, is that so often I get so attached to characters and I wasn't really attached to anyone in particular. I don't know. But yes, I was sympathetic for their plights. I really felt for Iad, who had to balance her identities and feeling torn between her loyalties, and poor Sabrin and all just the grief and the loss she had to endure. It was gut-wrenching to read her story. And poor Tane, who believed she didn't deserve forgiveness for what she'd done, and the way she finds that forgiveness through the bond with her dragon. It was just very sweet. So I really liked the character arcs, and I don't want to convey that they were poorly written characters, because their arcs are really cool and they're very neat and they work well for the story. They just weren't my personal favorite. But yeah, the characters were pretty cool, and I liked them, and I appreciated the arcs that they had. And again, it's one of those things where, like, I don't think I'm going to be thinking about them forever. They're not going to live in my heart, but I do appreciate them, and I'm glad to have spent time in their world and in their story. I think that's all. I think those are all my thoughts. Again, I don't think I had as many this time. I had more on the spoiler-free end of things, because I want to encourage you to read it because it was very good. Things you can expect from me soon. My first readathon of the year. I believe on the day that I'm posting it, it's about 2 days away. I'm doing it on Monday the 18th. So I'm really excited. We'll see how I do energy-wise. I'm a little nervous about that, but we'll figure it out. I will be updating periodically on Instagram, but I will be just recording my progress throughout the day and making a video for that, and that should be up sometime near the end of next week. So you can expect that from me. My plan is to read The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. Super excited about that. We'll see if I get through all of them, but I'm looking forward to it. I just finished Pure Nessie, and I was considering doing a video on it, but it's, I can't. That's a book where the more I sit here and think about it and the more reviews I read of it, it's one of those that you can't really review. You kind of just have to go read it for yourself. So I will put up a Goodreads review for that soon, but don't expect a video on Pure Nessie from me, because I feel like I can't talk about it without spoiling what the story is in any way, shape, or form. So yeah. And then after Monday's readathon, I will be reading The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, which is like the classic Arthurian tale told by the women of Arthur's tale, and I'm really excited about that. But that's the last book of the month for me before I move into April's reads. So that's everything coming up. As a reminder, I kind of discussed this recently on Instagram, but I do still post a review on Goodreads for every book I read. I don't do a video for all of them. Some of them I just don't have enough to say, or I don't have enough time to film a video for every single one. I could maybe come up with something for each one, but it's one of those things where it's just eating into my schedule, and I need more time to write than I've been giving myself. Like I said, I'm pulling back on the videos like I've talked about before, but I still give a Goodreads review for all of them. So if you're curious about anything that I've read recently, or you would like to hear my thoughts on something that I read but have not posted a video for, you can go check out my Goodreads, and I will have the review linked there. You can find both my Goodreads and my Instagram linked below. Those are other platforms you can follow this journey on. And if you feel so inclined, you can also like this video and subscribe below. Thanks as always for tuning in to listen to me ramble about my thoughts. I feel like that's pretty much what these videos are at this point, is me just rambling endlessly about what I think and repeating myself over and over again, but I appreciate you listening in anyway and for evaluating what I have to say. I don't know if it's anything special or new or particularly compelling, but I'm glad you're here to chat with me, so thank you. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it, so hope you all are doing well. Thanks for tuning in, and I will chat with you all soon.